The marketplace at Hollow Ridge was always busy on Fifth Day, but today it was packed to the point of being dangerous. Sarah kept one hand on each of her twins' shoulders as she navigated through the crowd, steering them away from carts and horses and the careless elbows of wolves who didn't look where they were going. "Mama, you're squishing me." Mary squirmed under Sarah's grip, her small face scrunched in protest. "I'm keeping you safe," Sarah corrected, not loosening her hold. "Last time I let go, you wandered off to pet a dog, and I didn't find you for 20 minutes. "The dog was very soft," Mary said defensively. "The dog belonged to a merchant who thought you were trying to steal it," Sarah reminded her. "Your brother had to explain that you just like dogs." Kai, walking on Sarah's other side, nodded seriously. "I told him Mary loves all animals, even the mean rooster that pecks everyone." "Especially that rooster," Mary agreed. "He's just misunderstood." Sarah felt a smile tug at her lips despite her exhaustion. Her twins were 6 years old, identical in appearance with dark curly hair and amber eyes that reflected Sarah's own. But their personalities were entirely different. Kai was cautious and thoughtful, always considering consequences before acting. Mary was fearless and impulsive, diving headfirst into everything and dealing with the aftermath later. Together, they were a handful that Sarah managed alone because she had no other choice. Their father had died before they were born, killed in a border dispute that still hadn't been fully resolved. As a widow with twin infants and no mate bond to anchor her in the pack hierarchy, Sarah had quickly discovered that she existed in a precarious position. Tolerated but not valued, allowed to stay but never truly belonging. She worked 3 jobs to keep them fed and housed. Mornings she cleaned at the pack house. Afternoons she mended clothes for anyone who would pay. Evenings she helped at the tavern, serving drinks to warriors who sometimes remembered to tip and sometimes didn't. It was exhausting, endless work that barely kept them afloat. But it was better than the alternative, which was being cast out entirely. "Mama, I'm hungry." Kai tugged on her sleeve. "Can we eat soon?" Sarah glanced at the sun. Nearly midday, and she'd been so focused on getting her market errands done that she'd forgotten about lunch. Again, she was a terrible mother, she thought with familiar guilt. Always forgetting meals, always too tired to play, always saying later and maybe and we'll see. "We'll eat by the old oak tree," she decided. "The one at the edge of the market where it's quieter. Go ahead and find a spot while I finish buying bread." The twins took off immediately, weaving through the crowd with the ease of small bodies used to navigating tight spaces. Sarah watched them go with her heart in her throat, as she did every time they left her sight. The world was dangerous for pups, especially pups with only one parent and no strong pack bonds to protect them. She bought bread from the baker, day-old, which was all she could afford, and a small wedge of cheese that the vendor sold her cheap because it was starting to get hard around the edges. Lunch for 3, barely enough to fill their stomachs, but it would have to do. By the time she reached the old oak tree, she was expecting to find her twins sitting peacefully in the shade, probably arguing about something inconsequential the way they always did. Instead, she found them sitting cross-legged on the ground with a third child between them, all 3 hunched over something that Sarah couldn't quite see. Her first instinct was alarm. Strange children meant strange adults nearby, and she'd learned to be wary of other pack members who might view her twins as easy targets for bullying, or worse. But as she got closer, she realized there were no adults watching this third child. In fact, there was no one paying attention to the small, filthy figure at all. The child was young, maybe 4 or 5, though it was hard to tell under all the dirt. Matted blonde hair hung in tangles past narrow shoulders. Clothes that might once have been gray were now brown with ground in grime. Bare feet were caked with mud, and the child's hands, currently reaching toward something Mary was holding, were covered in scratches and old scabs. "Mary? Kai? What are you doing?" Sarah approached slowly, not wanting to startle anyone. Both twins looked up with identical expressions of determined compassion that Sarah recognized all too well. It was the same look they got when they found injured birds or when they insisted on leaving food out for the stray cats that haunted the alley behind their cottage. "We're sharing lunch," Kai said simply, as if that explained everything. "With who?" Sarah crouched down to get a better look at the third child, who immediately tried to scramble backward. But Miri had a gentle hand on the child's arm, and Kai had positioned himself on the other side, creating a barrier between the stranger and escape. "We don't know their name yet," Miri said. "They won't talk to us. But we found them digging in the trash pile behind the butcher's stall, and Mama, they were eating scraps. Raw scraps. So we brought them here, and we're sharing our lunch because that's what you're supposed to do when someone's hungry." Sarah's heart clenched. She looked more closely at the child between her twins. Now that she was paying attention, she could see just how thin the small body was, how prominent the bones showed through the ragged clothing. And the eyes, pale blue and wary, held a wildness that spoke of too much time alone, too much fear, too little trust. "Hello," Sarah said softly. "What's your name, little one?" The child didn't answer, didn't even blink. Just stared at Sarah with those feral eyes, body tense and ready to bolt at the first sign of threat. "They haven't said anything," Kai reported. "Not one word. But they understand us. When Miri said she had food, they followed us." "Look, Mama." Miri held up her hand, which held half of an apple that Sarah had packed that morning. "They took it when I offered, but then they just held it, like they don't trust that it's really for them." Sarah felt her throat tighten. She knew that wariness, that inability to believe in kindness. She'd felt it herself in the early days after her mate's death, when she'd learned that safety was an illusion and trust could be a fatal mistake. "May I come closer?" she asked the child, keeping her voice gentle and her movements slow. A slight hesitation, then the smallest nod. Progress. Sarah settled onto the ground across from the three children, careful to leave escape routes open. She unwrapped the bread and cheese, breaking them into portions. The child's eyes followed every movement, fixated on the food with an intensity that made Sarah's stomach hurt. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She tried again. Still no answer. But the child's gaze flickered to Miri, then to Kai, then back to the food. "That's okay," Sarah said. "You don't have to tell us, but you can eat with us if you'd like. We have plenty." It was a lie. They didn't have plenty at all, but no child should sit hungry while others ate. Miri thrust the apple half forward. "Here, it's yours. I already said." The child took it with trembling hands and bit into it so hard that juice ran down their chin. They ate like a starving animal, all manners forgotten or maybe never learned, making desperate little sounds that broke Sarah's heart into pieces. Kai offered his share of the bread next, then his cheese. The child took both and devoured them just as frantically. Sarah watched, doing quick mental calculations. If she skipped lunch herself and divided her portion between the twins, they'd be fine. And this child needed food more than Sarah needed to ease her own hunger. "Here." She held out her bread and cheese. "Take mine too." For the first time, the child hesitated. Those pale blue eyes met Sarah's, and she saw confusion there. Suspicion. An inability to understand why anyone would give up food when they clearly had so little themselves. "It's okay," Sarah assured them. "I already ate earlier. This is extra." Another lie, but a kind one. The child took the food and ate more slowly this time, as if trying to make it last, as if already mourning the moment when it would be gone and hunger would return. "Where are your parents?" Sarah asked gently. "Where's your family?" The child flinched at the word parents, a full-body recoil that spoke volumes. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good: orphaned, abandoned, abused, and run away. "They're alone," Mary announced with the certainty of a 6-year-old who'd made up her mind. "Nobody's taking care of them, so we're going to do it." "Mary, we can't just—" Sarah started, but Kai interrupted. "Why not? We have room in our cottage. They can sleep in our room. We'll share. Baby, it's not that simple. This child belongs to someone somewhere. We can't just take them home. But nobody's looking for them, Kai pointed out with devastating logic. We've been here for 20 minutes, and nobody's come asking about a missing pup. That means either nobody knows they're gone, or nobody cares. Either way, they need help. Sarah looked at her son and saw her own fierce protectiveness reflected back at her. She looked at Miri, who had wrapped an arm around the strange child's shoulders, and was glaring at Sarah as if daring her to try to separate them. And she looked at the child herself, who had stopped eating to watch this exchange, with wary hope dawning in those haunted eyes. We'll ask around, Sarah said finally, knowing even as she said it, that no one would claim this pup. Children didn't get this feral, this thin, this afraid when they had families who cared. We'll see if anyone knows who they belong to, but while we're asking, they can come home with us, just for tonight, just until we find out where they're supposed to be. Miri's face lit up. Really? Really? But this is temporary, do you understand? We're helping until we find their family. We're not keeping them. Except she knew, with absolute certainty, that if no family stepped forward, and no family would, she was absolutely keeping them, because she'd learned long ago that you didn't turn away from children in need. You didn't close your heart just because opening it was dangerous. You did what was right, consequences be damned. The child hadn't moved, hadn't responded to any of this discussion. But when Sarah stood and held out her hand, the child looked at it for a long moment, then, slowly, carefully, placed their own grimy hand in Sarah's palm. The touch was electric. For just a second, Sarah felt something pulse through the contact, a warmth, a recognition, something she couldn't name. The child felt it too, judging by the way those blue eyes widened in surprise. "What's your name?" Sarah asked one more time, softer now. The child's mouth opened, closed, opened again. When the voice finally came, it was rough from disuse, barely more than a whisper. "River." "River," Sarah repeated, testing the name. It fit somehow, something wild and untamed, natural and free. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Sarah, and these are my twins, Miri and Kai. We're going to take care of you now, okay?" River nodded once, a jerky motion that suggested they weren't used to trusting anyone with anything, let alone with their safety. Getting River back to their cottage was an adventure in paranoia. Every wolf they passed seemed to stare at the filthy child holding Sarah's hand. Every whisper felt like it was about them. Every glance felt like judgment or worse, like recognition that might lead to River being taken away. But they made it without incident, and Sarah ushered all three children into the small cottage she rented at the edge of pack territory. It wasn't much. 2 rooms, a leaky roof, and a stove that worked when it felt like it. But it was theirs, and it was private. "First thing, we need to get you clean," Sarah told River. "When was the last time you had a bath?" River's blank expression suggested they either didn't remember or didn't know. "Right. Bath it is." Sarah started heating water on the stove, while Miri and Kai showed River around their tiny home, pointing out where everything was, with the enthusiasm of tour guides at a palace instead of a cottage that was barely standing. The bath was a challenge. River was afraid of the water, afraid of being touched, afraid of everything in a way that suggested really terrible things in their past. But with patience and help from the twins, who climbed right into the bathtub with River, clothes and all, to show there was nothing to fear, they managed to get the worst of the grime off. Under all the dirt, River was beautiful. Blonde hair that shone almost white when clean, pale skin that showed bruises in various stages of healing, and those striking blue eyes that seemed to see everything and trust nothing. Sarah found clothes that would fit, hand-me-downs from the twins that were worn but clean, and dressed River in soft pants and a tunic that swallowed their small frame. The child stood in the middle of the room looking lost and overwhelmed, hands twisting in the fabric of the too large shirt. "Hungry?" Sarah asked, even though they'd just eaten at the market. River's eyes went immediately to the small pantry, and Sarah sighed. Of course they were still hungry. That scrap of bread and cheese hadn't been nearly enough for someone who'd clearly been starving for a while. She made soup, thin soup, because that's all she had supplies for, but hot and filling. River ate 3 bowls, and Sarah let them, mentally calculating how she'd make the remaining food stretch until her next payment came. As evening fell and Sarah prepared the twins for bed, she found herself facing a logistical problem. She had 1 bed for herself and 1 for the twins. There was literally nowhere else to sleep in the tiny cottage. "River sleeps with us," Miri declared, solving the problem with typical 6-year-old certainty. "There's room. We'll squish." And they did squish, all 3 children piling into the small bed with the ease of puppies in a den. River ended up in the middle, Miri on one side and Kai on the other, both twins unconsciously forming a protective barrier around their new friend. Sarah sat on her own bed and watched them settle, her heart aching with a complex mix of emotions she couldn't name. Love for her twins, who had such huge hearts. Fear for what taking in River might mean. Worry about how she'd manage feeding 3 children instead of 2. And underneath it all, a strange certainty that this was meant to happen, that River was supposed to be here, that some thread of fate had led her children to that trash pile at exactly the right moment. She was still awake hours later when the knock came at the door. It was a sharp, authoritative knock that made her heart jump into her throat. She crossed to the door and opened it a crack, peering out into the darkness. There were wolves outside, many wolves. And at the front of the group stood a man who radiated such intense power that Sarah's instinct was to drop immediately to her knees in submission. The Alpha King. She didn't know how she knew. She'd never seen him before, never even been close to the pack center where visiting dignitaries stayed, but she knew with absolute certainty. This was Magnus, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, one of the most powerful wolves in the entire region. "I'm looking for a child," he said without preamble, his voice deep and resonant in the quiet night. "A pup with blonde hair and blue eyes, about 4 or 5 years old. I was told they were seen in the marketplace today, with twin children matching the description of your own." Sarah's blood turned to ice. There was a child, but I didn't know they belonged to anyone, especially not—" "They're mine," Magnus interrupted, his eyes burning with an intensity that made Sarah step back instinctively. "River is my son, and he's been missing for 3 days." Sarah felt the world tilt. River was the Alpha King's son? The filthy, starving, feral child her twins had found eating garbage was royalty. "He's here," she managed. "He's safe. We didn't know. I swear we didn't know who he was. He couldn't tell us, and no one in the marketplace seemed to be looking for him. And I thought—" "You thought you'd take him home?" Magnus's expression was unreadable. "Feed him, bathe him, put him to bed with your own children?" "Yes." Sarah lifted her chin, refusing to be ashamed of kindness, even if it turned out to be a crime. "I thought I'd do exactly that, because he was hungry and scared and alone, and I don't care who someone's parents are. No child should be left to fend for themselves." For a long moment, Magnus just looked at her. Then, incredibly, he smiled. It transformed his face from intimidating to something almost gentle. "Show me," he said quietly. Sarah led him inside, acutely aware of how small and shabby her cottage must seem to someone who lived in a palace. But Magnus didn't seem to notice the peeling paint, or the crack in the wall, or the stove that was held together with wire and prayers. His attention was fixed entirely on the bed where 3 children slept in a tangled pile. River was in the middle, one small hand clutching Kai's shirt, the other tangled in Miri's curls. Both twins had their arms wrapped around him, creating a cocoon of safety and warmth. All 3 were deeply asleep, their faces peaceful in a way that suggested they felt completely secure. Magnus made a sound, small, choked, almost like pain. He crossed to the bed and knelt beside it, his large hand hovering over River's clean blonde hair, but not quite touching, as if afraid his touch might shatter something precious. "River," he whispered. "Oh, my boy. We've been looking everywhere for you." River stirred, eyes fluttering open. For a moment, he looked confused, disoriented by the unfamiliar room and the warm bodies pressed against him. Then his gaze found Magnus, and everything changed. "Papa!" The word was a broken cry. River lunged out of the bed and into Magnus's arms, nearly knocking the Alpha King backward with the force of his desperate embrace. Magnus caught him and held on tight, his face buried in River's hair, his shoulders shaking with what might have been sobs. "I've got you. I've got you now. You're safe." Sarah backed away, giving them privacy, but she couldn't look away from the raw emotion on the Alpha King's face. This was a father's love, she realized, pure and fierce and absolutely devastating in its intensity. The twins had woken during the commotion. They sat up in bed, blinking sleepily, taking in the massive stranger holding River. "Who's that?" Mary asked with her usual lack of filter. "That's River's papa," Sarah explained quietly. "He's been looking for River." "Oh." Kai's face fell. "Does that mean River has to leave now?" Magnus looked up at that, his eyes finding Sarah's twins with an expression of dawning understanding. "You're the ones who found him, who shared your lunch with him." "He was hungry," Mary said, as if that explained everything. "He was eating from the garbage," Kai added. "Nobody should have to do that." "No," Magnus agreed softly. "No one should." He stood slowly, River still in his arms, the child's face pressed against his neck. "Thank you, both of you. You saved him. You gave him food when he needed it, safety when he was afraid. That's—" His voice caught. "That's a gift I can never repay." "You don't have to repay it," Sarah said firmly. "We didn't help him expecting anything in return. We helped because it was right." Magnus looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. "What if I told you there was something I wanted to give you anyway? Not as payment, but as gratitude. And as recognition that my son has apparently chosen your children as his family." Sarah frowned, confused. "I don't understand." "River has been struggling since his mother died 6 months ago," Magnus said quietly. "He stopped talking, stopped eating properly, started running away whenever he could. We've tried everything, healers, therapists, endless patience and love. Nothing worked. He just kept getting more withdrawn, more lost. Until today." He looked down at River, then back at the twins. "Today, he talked, he ate, he trusted, because of your children." "They're special," Sarah said, pride and love warming her voice. "But I don't see what that has to do with—" "I want to claim them," Magnus interrupted. "All 3 of you. Bring you into my household, make you part of my family. River needs Miri and Kai. And I think—" He paused, his eyes intense on Sarah's face. "I think maybe you need us too." Sarah stared at the Alpha King in shock. Claim them. Bring them into his household? That was impossible. People like her didn't get claimed by royalty. They got exploited, used, and discarded. This had to be some kind of trick. "I appreciate the offer, Alpha King, but we're fine where we are." The lie tasted bitter, but safer than whatever trap this was. "Are you?" Magnus's gaze swept the tiny cottage, taking in the patched walls, the insufficient furniture, the evidence of poverty that Sarah couldn't hide. "Because from where I'm standing, you're working yourself to death to keep 3 children fed, and now you've taken in a 4th mouth without any guarantee you can feed him either." 3, Sarah corrected. "River is yours. He goes with you." "No." River's voice was sharp, panicked. He clung tighter to Magnus's neck, but turned his head to look at the twins with desperate eyes. Want to stay with Miri and Kai? Want to stay with them? Magnus's expression softened. I know you do, son. That's why I'm trying to arrange exactly that. But you're the Alpha King, Sarah protested. You can have anyone you want caring for your child. Trained nannies, experienced tutors, the best healers in the territory. Why would you want a poverty-stricken widow and her 2 unruly pups? Because my son wants them, Magnus said simply. And because in one afternoon, your twins did what 6 months of professional help couldn't do. They made River feel safe enough to trust again. He shifted River's weight and looked at Miri and Kai, who were watching this entire exchange with wide eyes. How did you do it? How did you know what he needed? Kai shrugged. We just shared our lunch. That's what friends do. And we didn't make him talk or act normal, Miri added. We just let him be himself. Exactly, Magnus said. That's the gift, not trying to fix him, but accepting him as he is. He looked back at Sarah. I'm not asking you to uproot your life for nothing. I'm offering you a position in my household. Official guardian to River, along with your own children, with appropriate salary and accommodations. The twins would be educated alongside River, raised as his companions. And you? He paused. You would have the security you've clearly been lacking. In exchange for what? Sarah's voice was hard. You want me to be grateful, to owe you, to feel obligated. And then one day you'll ask for something I can't give, and when I refuse, you'll take everything away, including my children. Magnus flinched, as if she'd struck him. That's not who I am. That's who every powerful person is, Sarah shot back. I've learned that lesson too well to forget it now. For a long moment, they stared at each other, Sarah with her chin raised in defiance despite her fear, Magnus with something that looked almost like hurt in his eyes. Mama, Kai's quiet voice broke the tension. I think he's telling the truth. How do you know? Sarah asked, without taking her eyes off Magnus. Because River trusts him, and River doesn't trust anyone except us. If his papa was bad, River would be scared. But he's not. He's happy. Sarah looked at River. Really looked. And Kai was right. River's body language had transformed from the tense wariness of the market to something loose and comfortable. He was still holding on to Magnus, but not with the desperate grip of a child afraid of being abandoned. This was the casual clutch of a pup who knew his parent would keep him safe. Let me tell you what happened, Magnus said quietly. 3 days ago, River disappeared from the palace grounds. We searched everywhere, mobilized every guard, questioned every wolf within 100 miles. I was out of my mind with worry, terrified that someone had taken him, hurt him, that I'd never see him again. And then tonight, a merchant who saw him at the market mentioned it to a guard, who mentioned it to my beta, who came to find me immediately. I came here expecting, I don't know what, but not this. Not my son, clean and fed and sleeping peacefully with his arms around 2 other pups who'd shown him more kindness in an afternoon than most wolves show in a lifetime. His voice roughened. You didn't know who he was. You had no reason to think helping him would benefit you. You did it anyway, even though it meant going hungry yourself to feed him. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious? Sarah felt her defenses cracking. I did what any decent person would do. No, you did what any decent parent would do. There's a difference. Magnus took a breath. I'm not asking you to trust me, not yet. Trust takes time, and you've clearly been hurt by people who should have protected you. But I am asking you to give this a chance. 1 month. Come to the palace, let River and your twins spend time together. See if this arrangement could work. If at the end of that month you want to leave, I'll set you up in a cottage of your own with enough money that you'll never have to work 3 jobs again. No strings attached. That's my promise, witnessed by everyone here. The guards behind him murmured agreement, their voices a chorus of assent. Sarah looked at them, a dozen wolves, all watching her with expressions that ranged from curious to sympathetic. If Magnus broke his word, all of them would know. It would damage his reputation, his authority. And if she refused, what then? Back to the cottage that was falling apart, back to working until exhaustion claimed her every night, back to choosing which bill to pay because she couldn't afford them all, back to watching her twins grow thinner each year because there was never quite enough food. 1 month, she said finally. Trial period. If it doesn't work, we leave with no hard feelings. Magnus's shoulders relaxed fractionally. 1 month, he agreed. Starting tomorrow. Tonight, River stays with you if that's all right. I don't want to disrupt what clearly makes him feel safe. My guards will remain outside to ensure your protection, and in the morning, I'll send a carriage to collect you all. We don't have much to pack, Sarah warned, then you'll travel light. Magnus smiled slightly. The palace has everything you'll need. He set River down gently, and the child immediately climbed back into bed with Miri and Kai, burrowing between them with a content sigh. All three settled like they'd been sleeping together for years instead of hours. Thank you, Magnus said quietly to Sarah, for everything. For finding him, feeding him, keeping him safe. For giving me back my son. I didn't do it for thanks, Sarah said. I know. That's exactly why you have them. Magnus nodded to her, then to his guards, and left as silently as he'd arrived. Sarah closed the door behind him and leaned against it, her legs suddenly weak. What had she just agreed to? Moving to the palace, living in the Alpha King's household, raising her children alongside royalty. It was insane, impossible, terrifying. But when she looked at the 3 pups sleeping peacefully in the bed, all tangled together like a litter of puppies, she felt something settle in her chest. Right or wrong, wise or foolish, she'd made her choice. Now she just had to live with it. Morning came too quickly. Sarah woke to find all 3 children already up, River showing Miri and Kai how to make patterns with pebbles he'd apparently collected from somewhere. They were chattering quietly, River's rough voice mixing with the twins' bright ones, and the domesticity of it made Sarah's heart ache. Papa's coming to get us today, River informed her when he noticed she was awake. We're going to the palace. All of us, Miri added, bouncing with excitement. We're going to live with you. Kai looked more uncertain. Is it really okay, Mama? We won't be in the way. You're not in the way, Sarah assured him, crossing to gather both twins in a hug. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. The carriage arrived mid-morning, far grander than anything Sarah had ever ridden in. The driver helped them load their few possessions, 2 bags of clothing, a box of treasures the twins insisted they couldn't leave behind, and not much else. Everything they owned fit easily in the carriage's storage compartment. The ride to the palace took an hour, winding through increasingly prosperous neighborhoods until they reached the pack center itself. The palace was enormous, a sprawling complex of stone buildings connected by covered walkways and courtyards. Guards stood at every entrance, their eyes tracking the carriage but not stopping it. They pulled up to a side entrance where Magnus waited with a woman who looked to be in her 50s, gray-haired and stern-faced. This is Alara, my head housekeeper. Magnus introduced them after helping everyone out of the carriage. She'll show you to your quarters and help you get settled. If you need anything at all, she's the person to ask. Ilara's expression softened slightly as she looked at the children. Welcome to the palace. I've prepared the family wing for you. 4 bedrooms sharing a common area. I thought the children might want to be close together. 4 bedrooms? Sarah couldn't imagine what she'd do with that much space. 1 for you, 1 for each twin, and 1 for River, Alara explained. Though I suspect they'll all end up in 1 room anyway. Children have a way of gravitating together. She was right. By that evening, all 3 pups had declared that they'd be sleeping in River's room, which was the largest and had a window that overlooked the gardens. Sarah didn't argue. If proximity to the twins was what River needed to feel safe, she wasn't going to interfere. The palace was overwhelming. Servants appeared to handle every task Sarah was used to doing herself. Meals arrived, without her having to cook them. Laundry vanished and reappeared clean and folded. For the first few days, she felt useless, purposeless, like an ornament with no function. But then Alara came to her with a proposition. The Alpha King mentioned you might enjoy helping in the kitchens, if you're interested. Not as a servant, she added quickly, seeing Sarah's face. As someone who enjoys cooking, the staff could use help planning meals that the children will actually eat, and frankly, no one here knows what River likes. He won't tell them, and he won't eat half of what they prepare. It was something to do, at least. Sarah started spending mornings in the kitchens, working with the cooks to create meals that appealed to picky pup palates. River, it turned out, liked simple foods: bread with honey, fruit, cheese, plain roasted meat. Nothing with too many spices or complicated sauces. The afternoons were for the children. Magnus had arranged for a tutor to come teach them reading, writing, mathematics, pack history. River struggled with sitting still for lessons, but with Miri and Kai flanking him, encouraging him, making everything into a game, he managed. Sarah watched from the doorway one afternoon as the twins helped River sound out words in a picture book. They were so patient, so kind, never showing frustration when he got stuck or made the same mistake 3 times in a row. "They're remarkable," a voice said beside her. Magnus had appeared silently, his gaze fixed on the children. "They learned compassion from necessity," Sarah said. "When you're at the bottom of pack hierarchy, you either help each other or you don't survive. And yet many wolves in that position become bitter and selfish, hoarding what little they have." Magnus glanced at her. "Your twins share everything, even with a stranger." "Especially with a stranger," Sarah corrected. "Because strangers might be even more desperate than you are." They stood in companionable silence, watching the children. River was laughing at something Kai had said, his whole face lit with joy. He looked nothing like the feral, frightened pup from the marketplace. This was a happy child, secure and loved. "How is he doing?" Sarah asked. "Really, I mean, when we're not around." Magnus's expression clouded. "He's still struggling. He won't talk to anyone except the twins, and even with them, he's selective about what he says. He has nightmares almost every night. And if he's left alone for more than a few minutes, he starts to panic." "He's grieving," Sarah said softly. "Grief doesn't follow a schedule." "I know, but I hate seeing him in pain and not being able to fix it." "You can't fix grief, you can only survive it." Sarah spoke from experience. "Be patient, let him heal at his own pace, and don't take it personally that he needs the twins right now. Children sometimes need other children in ways that adults can't fulfill." "Is that what you needed? After your mate died?" Sarah stiffened. She didn't like talking about that time, about the dark months when she'd barely functioned, when only the twins' dependence on her had kept her from giving up entirely. "I had my pups," she said carefully. "They needed me, so I kept going. That's all." "That's everything," Magnus said quietly. "The will to keep going for someone else's sake. That's what saved you. And right now, that's what's saving River. The twins give him a reason to try." Over the following weeks, Sarah watched River's transformation continue. He started playing more, running through the palace gardens with Miri and Kai, laughing at their jokes, initiating games instead of just following along. His nightmares decreased in frequency. He started eating without being coaxed. And slowly, carefully, he started talking to others besides the twins. First to Sarah, asking her to play a game with them. Then to Alara, requesting his favorite bread for breakfast. Then to the tutor, answering a question about pack history. It wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy. There were setbacks, days when River retreated back into silence, when he refused to leave his room, when he clung to the twins and wouldn't let anyone else near. But with patience and consistency, with the twins' unwavering support and Magnus's steady presence, River slowly rejoined the world. 1 month turned into 2, then 3. Sarah stopped thinking of the palace as temporary and started thinking of it as home. She learned the names of all the staff, figured out which corridors led where, found her favorite spots in the gardens. The twins enrolled in the pack school alongside River, and all 3 thrived under the attention of teachers who actually had time to help them learn. And Sarah started to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Not just physically safe, though the palace guard certainly provided that, but emotionally safe. Like maybe, possibly, she could trust that this wouldn't be pulled away from her without warning. Magnus helped with that. He was unfailingly respectful, never pushing, never demanding. He checked in with her regularly to make sure she had everything she needed. He asked her opinion on decisions regarding River's care and actually listened to her answers. He treated her not as a servant or an obligation, but as a partner in raising their children. Their children. When had she started thinking of River as hers too? Probably around the same time, Magnus started referring to Miri and Kai as the pups in the same breath as River, grouping all 3 together as family. It was after a particularly good day. All 3 children had performed in a school presentation about pack history, and they'd been so proud and excited that Magnus asked Sarah to have dinner with him, just the 2 of them after the children were in bed. She almost said no. Private dinners with the Alpha King felt dangerous, like crossing a line she hadn't even known existed. But curiosity won out, and she found herself sitting across from him in a small dining room, far more intimate than the grand formal spaces she'd seen. "I wanted to talk about making this permanent," Magnus said, after the first course had been served and the servants had left them alone. Sarah's heart jumped. Making what permanent? This arrangement. You living here, helping raise River, the children growing up together. He paused. "I know we said 1-month trial period, and that was 4 months ago. I should have brought this up sooner, but I didn't want to pressure you. But Sarah, this is working. River is healing, your twins are thriving, and you—" He met her eyes. "You seem happier than when you first arrived." "I am," she admitted. "But making it permanent means what exactly? I continue as River's guardian, the twins continue as his companions." "That. And also," Magnus took a breath, "also, I'd like to officially adopt Miri and Kai. Make them legally mine, give them the protections and advantages that come with being acknowledged as Alpha's children. They'd have inheritance rights, pack status, every opportunity." Sarah's mind reeled. Adopt the twins, make them royalty. It was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. "Why?" she managed. "Because I love them," Magnus said simply. "They've brought joy back to my household, light to River's darkness. They're smart and kind and brave, and they deserve every advantage I can give them. But more than that—" He hesitated. "More than that, they've become family, not just to River, but to me, and I want to make that official." "And me?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Where do I fit in this permanent arrangement?" "Wherever you want," Magnus said. "You could remain as guardian, separate but part of the household, or—" He paused, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. "Or you could let me court you properly. Let me try to earn your trust, your affection, maybe eventually your heart. Let me show you that not all powerful wolves are cruel, that some of us keep our promises." Sarah stared at him. Court her? The Alpha King wanted to court her? "I'm not asking for an answer now," Magnus continued. "I know this is sudden, overwhelming. I just wanted you to know my intentions. I want you here, Sarah. Not as an employee, not as an obligation, as family, as my partner, if you'll have me, as my mate, eventually, if that's something you could want." "I don't know what I want," Sarah said honestly. "I've spent so long just surviving that I haven't had time to think about what I actually want from life." "Then take time," Magnus said gently. "We have plenty of it. The children are happy, settled. There's no rush. Just think about it. Think about whether you could see a future here. Whether you could see a future with me. Sarah thought about it. Over the next weeks, she watched Magnus with new eyes, saw how patient he was with River's continued struggles, saw how he made time for Miri and Kai, teaching them to track, telling them stories, treating them with the same care he showed his own son. Saw how he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, with warmth and hope and something that might have been love. And she started to think that maybe, possibly, she could want this, could want him. Could want a life where she wasn't alone, where her children had a father who would protect them, where she had a partner to share the burden of parenting. It was terrifying. Opening herself to that possibility meant risking hurt on a scale she'd never experienced before. But as she watched her 3 pups play in the garden, as she saw them happy and safe and thriving, she thought maybe the risk was worth it. 6 months after that first dinner, on a cold winter evening when snow fell softly outside the palace windows, Sarah found herself standing in Magnus's office, with her heart pounding. "I've made a decision," she said without preamble. Magnus looked up from his paperwork, his expression carefully neutral. About everything. The permanent arrangement, the adoption, the courtship. She took a breath. Yes. Yes, to which part? All of it. Sarah's hands twisted in her skirt. Yes to making this permanent. Yes to adopting the twins. And yes to the courtship, if the offer still stands. Magnus stood slowly, like he was afraid sudden movement might spook her. The offer absolutely still stands. It will always stand. Sarah, are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. I'm sure. And she was. It had taken her months to get here, months of watching Magnus prove himself over and over. But she was sure. You've been patient with me. Gentle. You've never once pushed for more than I was ready to give. And you love my children, all 3 of them, like they're your own. How could I not want to build a life with someone like that? Magnus crossed the room in 3 quick strides and took her hands. I will spend every day proving you made the right choice. I promise you that. I know, Sarah said simply. And she did know. After months of watching him, she understood that Magnus was a man of his word. When he promised something, he delivered. The official adoption ceremony happened a week later, held in the Great Hall with the entire pack in attendance. Miri and Kai stood on either side of Magnus, both dressed in fine clothes they still didn't quite know how to wear comfortably, looking overwhelmed by the crowd of witnesses. Alpha Magnus spoke the formal words, claiming them as his children in the eyes of pack law. He marked each of them with a drop of his blood, mixed with theirs, the traditional wolf bonding that signified family ties stronger than mere genetics. And then he knelt down to their level and said something quiet that only they could hear. Whatever it was made Kai throw his arms around Magnus's neck in a fierce hug, made Mary's eyes fill with tears, even as she smiled bright enough to light the room, made both twins look at Magnus with something new in their expressions, not just trust, not just affection, but love. Pure, uncomplicated, childish love for a parent who'd claimed them. Sarah watched from the side and felt her own eyes burn. Her pups, who'd grown up with nothing, who'd learned to expect disappointment and scarcity, now had an alpha father who would give them everything. Not just material things, though there would be plenty of those. But safety, stability, the certainty that they mattered. After the ceremony, during the celebration feast, River climbed into Sarah's lap and signed something he'd been practicing for weeks. His voice, still rough from limited use, shaped the words carefully. Are you my mama now? Really mine? Sarah felt her heart crack open. I've been your mama since the day you ate lunch with my twins. But yes, really yours. Forever. Good. River snuggled against her chest. I was scared you'd leave. Everyone leaves. Not me, Sarah promised. Not ever. You're stuck with me, Pop. And Papa? Is he stuck with us too? Especially Papa. Sarah looked across the hall to where Magnus was talking with pack elders, Miri and Kai, flanking him like small, fierce guards. We're a family now. All 5 of us. That means we stick together no matter what. Rivers seemed to accept this, relaxing against her with a content sigh. Within minutes he was asleep, exhausted from the excitement of the day. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Sarah had expected. Magnus courted her with the same patience he'd shown in everything else. Slowly, carefully, always respecting her boundaries. He brought her flowers from the palace gardens. He arranged quiet dinners where they could talk without the children interrupting. He asked about her day, her opinions, her dreams for the future. And gradually, almost without Sarah noticing, he became essential. She started looking for him when she entered a room. Started sharing news with him first, before anyone else. Started thinking of them as we, instead of I. The children noticed, of course. Children always notice these things. Are you and Papa going to get mated? Kai asked one evening with the bluntness of an 8-year-old who saw no reason to be subtle. Sarah nearly choked on her tea. What makes you ask that? Because you look at each other the way the mated pairs in our lessons look at each other, Miri supplied. And because Papa smiles more now, and because you're happy when he's around. And because River said if you don't mate Papa, he's going to start a campaign to convince you, Kai added. He has diagrams. Despite herself, Sarah laughed. Diagrams? Very detailed ones, Kai said seriously, about why Papa would be a good mate. There are charts. River made charts. I helped, Miri admitted. But it was his idea. Sarah didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Her pups, all 3 of them now officially, were scheming to get her mated. It was absurd and sweet and entirely too much. That night, she told Magnus about the charts. He laughed so hard he nearly fell off his chair. Should I be concerned that my 5-year-old is making strategic plans about my love life? He asked between gasps. Probably, but it's also kind of adorable. It is. Magnus sobered slightly. Though if the children's campaigning is making you uncomfortable. It's not, Sarah interrupted. It's nice. Knowing they want this. That they're not just tolerating our relationship, but actively encouraging it. So you have been thinking about mating. Magnus's eyes were suddenly intense on hers. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Maybe. Maybe yes, or maybe no. Maybe I'm waiting for you to actually ask, instead of letting our 5-year-old do the negotiating for you. Magnus laughed again, but this time there was something else in it, something warm and sure. Fair point. Give me a few days to plan something appropriate. I promise it will be worth the wait. 4 days later, Magnus took her to a private garden on the palace grounds, a small walled space that most people didn't even know existed. It was evening, and someone had strung lights through the trees, creating a canopy of stars above their heads. This is beautiful, Sarah breathed. River chose it, Magnus admitted. Apparently his charts included venue suggestions. Sarah laughed, despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Of course they did. Magnus took her hands, his expression turning serious. Sarah, I know we've only been courting for a few months. I know by traditional standards I should wait longer, give you more time. But I'm not a patient man when it comes to things I want. And I want you. I want to wake up with you beside me. I want to raise our children together officially. I want to face every challenge and celebrate every joy as your mate. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a ring. Simple but beautiful, with a stone that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow colors. Will you accept my claim? Will you be my mate, my partner, my Luna? Sarah looked at the ring, at Magnus's hopeful face, at the garden River had helped choose. She thought about how far they'd all come, from that desperate day in the marketplace to this moment of offered belonging. She thought about her twins sharing their lunch with a starving stranger. About Magnus tracking down his son and finding a family instead. About 3 children who should have been separate but had recognized each other as pack from the first moment. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Yes, to all of it. Magnus slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that was gentle and fierce and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Sarah heard applause and looked up to find all 3 children hiding badly behind a nearby hedge, grinning like fools. "You were supposed to wait until we said you could come out," Magnus called to them, trying to sound stern and failing completely. "We got excited," Miri called back, not even pretending to be sorry. The children rushed over, all 3 talking at once, asking to see the ring, demanding to know when the mating ceremony would be, making plans that ranged from reasonable to absolutely ridiculous. Sarah gathered them all close, her twins, her adopted son, her future mate, and felt something settle deep in her chest. This was family. This was belonging. This was home. The mating ceremony took place 2 months later, a grand affair that the entire pack attended. Sarah wore a dress that Alara had helped her choose, something elegant but not ostentatious, befitting a future Luna who'd come from humble origins. But the moment she'd remember forever wasn't the ceremony itself, or even the formal recognition by the pack. It was when Magnus marked her as his mate, and she marked him in return, and the bond snapped into place between them. A connection deeper than words, more fundamental than promises. Through that bond, she felt his love, fierce and absolute. His determination to protect her and the children, his hope for their future together. And underneath all of that, his relief that she'd chosen him, that she'd taken the risk of trusting someone with power after being hurt so many times before. She sent back her own emotions. Her love, still new, but growing stronger every day. Her gratitude for everything he'd given them. Her commitment to this family they were building together. And her own relief that she'd found someone who saw her children, not as burdens, but as blessings. After the ceremony, during the celebration, River climbed onto the dais where she and Magnus sat. He looked between them seriously, then signed something complicated that made Magnus laugh. "What did he say?" Sarah asked. "He said his charts predicted a 73% success rate for this mating, but he's pleased to announce the actual success rate is 100%, and he'll be keeping better data going forward." Sarah pulled River into her lap. "No more charts, pup. We're mated. You win." "We all win," River corrected, his voice soft but clear. "We're family. That's winning." From her other side, Kai climbed up too, followed immediately by Miri. The twins flanked Sarah and Magnus, creating a wall of pups between them and the celebrating crowd. "Group hug," Miri declared, and suddenly all 5 of them were tangled together, adults and children, biological family and chosen family, all mixed into one complicated, beautiful, absolutely perfect knot of belonging. The pack watched and cheered. The Alpha King and his newly mated Luna, surrounded by 3 pups who'd found each other against all odds and refused to let go. It was a story they'd tell for generations, about kindness in a marketplace, about twins who shared their lunch, about an alpha who tracked his son and found his soulmate. But in that moment, Sarah didn't care about stories or legends. She cared about the warm bodies pressed against her, about Magnus's hand in hers, about the bond thrumming between them. She cared about the future they were building, one day at a time. Years passed. The twins grew from pups into strong young wolves who carried both their birth mother's fierce compassion and their adopted father's steady leadership. River blossomed from a traumatized, silent child into a thoughtful young wolf who used both sign language and speech, who helped develop new communication methods for wolves with speech difficulties, who never forgot what it felt like to be seen as broken. Sarah became Luna in more than just name. She reformed the pack's approach to caring for vulnerable members, established programs for widows and orphans, created safe spaces for wolves who didn't fit the traditional molds. She'd learned from her own hardships and made sure no one else in her pack had to suffer the same way. And Magnus proved every single day that he'd meant his promises. He never pulled rank in their arguments, never made Sarah feel less than equal, never treated her twins as anything but his cherished children. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing year, until Sarah couldn't imagine existing without it. They had more children eventually. 2 more pups who grew up with Miri, Kai, and River as protective older siblings. The palace was loud and chaotic and full of life in a way it had never been before Sarah arrived. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were occupied with their own activities, Sarah and Magnus would sit in the small garden where he'd proposed and remember how this all started. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if the twins hadn't shared their lunch that day?" Magnus asked during one such evening. "Every day," Sarah admitted. "I think about how different our lives would be, how River might still be lost and hurting, how the twins and I might still be scraping by in that terrible cottage, how you and I would never have met." "One act of kindness," Magnus mused. "That's all it took to change everything." "Not just one act," Sarah corrected. "The twins sharing food with a stranger, you tracking down your son and offering to claim us all, me choosing to trust you despite every instinct screaming that it was dangerous, River deciding we were worth talking to again. Every single one of us made choices that led here." "True." Magnus pulled her closer, and she went willingly, settling against his chest with the ease of long practice. "But it started with the twins and their lunch. That was the first domino." Sarah thought about her 6-year-old twins sitting in the dirt with a feral, frightened pup, offering him half an apple in their whole hearts. She thought about how simple that gesture had been, how small, and how it had grown into this, into family, into pack, into love that encompassed all of them. "Mama, Papa," River's voice called from inside the palace. He was 12 now, his voice steady and strong. "Miri and Kai are fighting again about whose turn it is to choose the bedtime story, and they won't listen to me." "I call dibs on not dealing with this one," Magnus said immediately. "Too late, you're closer to the door." Sarah pushed him gently toward the palace. "Go, referee. I'll be there in a minute." Magnus groaned, but stood, dropping a kiss on her head before heading inside. Sarah heard him boom out, "What's all this noise about? Can't a father have 5 minutes of peace?" Followed by 3 different voices all trying to explain their positions at once. She smiled and stood to follow. This was her life now. Chaotic and loud, full of arguments and laughter, never quite calm, but always, always full of love. She'd spent so many years just surviving, keeping her head down, making herself small. And then her twins had taught her a different way. They'd seen a hungry stranger and shared what little they had. They'd recognized someone who needed help and offered it without counting the cost. That was the lesson Sarah held on to, the one she'd passed down to all her children and eventually to the pack itself. Kindness wasn't weakness. Compassion wasn't foolish. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was share your lunch with a stranger and see where it led. For her, it had led home. To a mate who cherished her, to children who thrived, to a life richer than anything she dared imagine during those dark years of widowhood and poverty. All because 2 6-year-old pups had looked at a feral child eating garbage and thought, "We should share our lunch." Sarah walked back into the palace toward the sound of her family's voices and felt gratitude wash through her. Not just for Magnus, though she loved him beyond measure. Not just for the comfort and security, though those mattered. But for the moment, her twins had taught her that reaching out was worth the risk, that opening your heart could lead to joy instead of pain. She'd been so wrong about powerful wolves. Not all of them were cruel. Some of them were like Magnus, strong enough to be gentle, powerful enough to be kind. And some of them, like her twins would grow to be, used their strength to protect the vulnerable instead of exploit them. "Mama!" Kai spotted her in the doorway. "Tell Miri that we read her pic last night, so it's my turn," Did not, Mary protested. Last night was River's pick. Actually, River said with the careful precision he used when he knew he was about to referee a dispute. Last night we read Mama's pick because you two couldn't agree. So technically, we're back to the rotation, which means it's Kai's turn, then Mary's, then mine. Both twins considered this, then nodded acceptance of River's logic. Magnus caught Sarah's eye and grinned, his expression saying clearly, "Our son, the diplomat. Our son." Sarah thought back through the bond, feeling Magnus's warm agreement. Not by blood, but by choice, by love. By that first moment in the marketplace when he'd been too scared to trust but hungry enough to hope. "Everyone to bed," Sarah announced. "Kai gets to pick the story, but only one tonight because it's late." The resulting protests were loud but good-natured, and within 20 minutes all 3 eldest children were tucked into bed, the story read, the arguments forgotten. Sarah and Magnus stood in the doorway watching them settle. River in the middle as always, the twins on either side. "Still think sharing that lunch was a good idea?" Magnus asked quietly. Sarah watched River reach out in his sleep to grab Kai's hand on one side and Mary's on the other, the 3 of them connecting even in dreams. Watched her twins automatically shift closer, protective even in slumber. "Best idea they ever had," she whispered back. "Changed all our lives." "Changed the whole pack," Magnus added. River's communication work, your reforms for vulnerable wolves, the twins' upcoming leadership training, none of it would exist without that day. "Then I'm glad they were kind," Sarah said simply. "I'm glad they chose compassion over caution. I'm glad they saw someone who needed help and helped him." "Me too." Magnus wrapped an arm around her waist. "Every single day, I'm grateful your twins have such huge hearts." They closed the door quietly and walked hand in hand back to their own chambers, leaving the children to sleep peacefully, safe and warm and loved. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the palace grounds in quiet white, and somewhere in the city beyond the walls, other children were learning the story about twins who shared their lunch with a feral pup, and how that single act of kindness had rippled outward, touching lives, changing futures, proving that even the smallest gesture could matter. Especially the small ones. Especially those given freely, without expectation of reward. Those were the ones that changed the world.